So thank you all for being here. This is our rescheduled December quarterly data and evaluation committee meeting. And we are gonna just dive right in. Today we're gonna hear a little bit from Kendall Fortney, who is the program director at the Vermont Research Open Source Program Office, VERSO at UVM. Hopefully I got that right. I will let him tell you more about himself. And then we're going to talk a little bit about committee advisement. So there's a lot of, we're in the midst of our legislative session, thinking a lot about what aligned data priorities and recommendations are looking like coming from this data and evaluation committee and how we're supporting each other and offering opportunities for collaboration. And then we'll do early childhood data updates. I do know that several people have to jump off at 2. So if you have updates and do need to jump off, feel free to put them in the chat or we can send them out after. Please put your name and anything else about yourself, where you work, what your role is in the chat. And we'll just jump right in with Kendall.
Hey everyone, today I'm going to throw up a deck in a second so we can actually have some visuals for our presentation. Second. Do you see a slide deck? Good, perfect. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to do about 15 minutes of kind of presenting a couple of things to you, give you some kind of the core concepts behind some of these things, and then open for questions and thoughts and ideas, because I'm really largely here to hear what you guys are thinking about. So my name is Kendall Fortney. I am the VERSO program director. I've worked at all those different companies. So I've spent 12 years working in tech startups in Vermont. My background is fine arts. I taught myself coding about 5 years ago and started doing stuff around data insights and analytics. Then I was working as a product manager at Social Sentinel and then joined Vermont, the University of Vermont, about 2 years ago. That was the beginning of VERSO, so the Vermont Research Open Source Program Office. Acronyms at academic institutions are greater than the ones in private industry, which has surprised me. They do not mess around. In that we do a bunch of different things. So 2022 was the beginning of this office. There was only a handful of these that exist inside of any academic institutions in the US. There's very few. And a lot of them, like us, were funded by the Sloan Foundation, trying to create this idea of actively supporting open source. We do that in a variety of ways. We run an ORCA program. I'll talk a little bit about that more later in the talk. I do consulting services to help researchers and communities adopt best practices to open source. That literally means like presenting at things like this or talking to other groups about some of these things, and then also helping researchers actually get their research out. We do a bunch of events and outreach. I've always been an organizer in Burlington, especially. And in the last year, we did the first Pi Data Vermont, which is around data science. I run an open source connector meetup. I'm also part of the Burlington Data Science meetup. We just did a tech meetup. So trying to build out some of the community here. And infrastructure and policy is like both promoting policy that actually grows this stuff, but also helps support like the things you need to actually use to do it. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second too. So open source is probably not as common a term inside of this group as it is, say, inside of my space of the tech world. Open is really about creating, sharing, and maintaining resources together. A lot of the space inside of academic spaces, that resource is data, it's software, it's process, it's documentation, it's publication. But open really can be in a lot of different places that aren't necessarily code or data-based. Today, I'm going to talk a tiny bit about open data as a concept. So open data is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Those 4 words are abbreviated by FAIR, F-A-I-R. And it's kind of the core of how we think about open data. It's the fact that you can actually find it when you search for it. It's accessible, so when it's there, you can actually use it. Interoperable means that it's not in some really weird esoteric format that no one can use. And reusable means that it's in a format that also can be used in the future if you think about growing that. And that's by anyone for any purpose. There's lots of different open data platforms, so places you store data. Some of those interested in repositories. So like at UVM, I'm trying to create an open data repository for the data that's created here that is more Vermont focused. There's also discipline specific ones in research is like a physics one. There's things that are more focused in that, in the spaces of like government, like the VCGI portal is kind of focused on geospatial data. Usually there's like a theme. There's also cross-disciplinary repositories that may cross some of those things. There's things in academia. There's like Dryad, and there's things that like, actually will generally collect lots of data to help. Um, when we think about this, so like this is kind of I'm going to talk about licensing for a second. It's probably try not to make your eyes glaze over. Licensing is a key component of open source. If you have something you've published and the person that's looking at it has no idea if they're allowed to use it, they don't. They won't. They won't even try. Licensing is really relevant for a lot of this. And software, especially if you're going to take and modify it, you need to actually have the license to do that and what the responsibilities are to do that. Um, in data, it's not as common because often data isn't as much copyrightable, um, but it can be helpful when displaying data that people know they can use it for other things. Database versus data content licenses. So, like, interestingly enough, database structures are actually more copyrightable because they're considered intellectual property, that they're creative processes versus data, which is often a statement of fact. So, like, those two things are kind of approached differently, and it's relevant to think about that there's different licenses for those. Data content licenses, the most common one you'll see is CCO, Creative Commons License Zero. Basically, like you can use it for anything. It's like the same thing as just being like it's public domain. Like you can use it for anything without even asking permission or even having to do attribution. Inside of a lot of more common is the CC BY, the Creative Commons attributions that requires attribution. So if you're going to do it, you have to like credit the original data set so you kind of know it. That's really useful if you're trying to also like qualify the data. Be like, is the data good? Someone's like, oh, I got this, and I totally, this is mine, and you have no idea where it came from. There could be reasons to be like, is that actually trustworthy data? So like thinking about these licenses will also help you like think about how people interact with it over time. In the course of my job, I ended up creating this, the Open Research Community Accelerator, or ORCA, because got to do the acronyms. And it was a multi-reason kind of thing. It's translating academic research or community needs into open source projects through a passionate group of students. That means that I hire students to try to solve problems that may be presented by a researcher or a community partner by creating open source projects that can be data or software, or more, actually, as this thing keeps on evolving. We started this in 2023. Our first pod was a research one. We created the Vermont zoning pod like 4 months later and started doing the student club in April. And then in June, we started another data project called wastewater. And we'll kind of go through these projects briefly in the course of this, and building out more and more. At this point, and actually, like this is always an evolving landscape. I may end up with 4 pods with over 25 students this semester, which is a lot, and lots of different stakeholders. They're all funded by grants, so they find money from a variety of people to make this happen. They can be federal grants, they can be local grants, they can be all sorts of places that we use to support this, because they are paid internships. The goal of this is to provide them with a real work experience, and that means that you deal with the fact you're getting paid. You have expectations if you're getting paid. They work in teams, and at this point, I've hired 25 students. They've done over 6,500 hours worked. Honestly, it's probably another 1,000 on top of that in the last month. And they work on 22 different open projects at this point. There's a bunch of different things that we're doing. I'll talk about a couple of these projects to give you like context of the work that we're doing, and we'll kind of talk about like the next piece of this, how this all intersects. So like Heard and Understood app is one that's active right now, and it's really a study of how conversations are being held in medical spaces, with the goal of using algorithms to understand whether people are actually listening. I'm sure all of us have experiences with doctors where you don't think they actually heard you. I'm sure there's plenty of experiences if you're a doctor to think the patient didn't actually hear you either. And part of the goal is to understand those silences and turn what is effectively a really complicated algorithm into an application to be more usable for a broader group of people. So think of like, instead of being like, hey, it's just the research group doing this thing, we're trying to like broaden that group. Another version is the Vermont Zoning Atlas. This is a data project. This was funded by a private donation, but was in conjunction with a lot of different agencies and partners, taking zoning data, which is generally PDFs of all the text you could imagine, and converting it to a geospatial data set that allows us to understand what is actually happening in our zoning landscape. This group of people that are involved in this, and I see Emma Spett had joined us on the call, is a key component of this as well as part of the Leahy Institute. Like these are all just groups of people that have common questions they're trying to solve, and finding ways that we can actually work on problems, identify what needs to be that solution, and deliver that. I'll talk a little bit more about that too, and getting that capacity to do it. Some of them may be students, some of them may be volunteers. In the Zoning Atlas, there were like a lot of volunteers. There's somewhere north of 50, and we had probably about 10 students that worked on that project. That kind of fed into like the Vermont livability map, which is the goal of taking a couple different data sets and trying to explain, like, not just like, hey, this is the zoning question, but like what impacts livability. So that's the wastewater project I'll talk about in a second, taking flooding data. This is like a data visualization story. So like how we explore this in a way that people can understand it without being a geospatial data specialist, which is not that common. One of the other pods that we're doing is the Rapid Innovation Prototyping Pod. This pod is specifically focused on taking some ideas from the project bank, which I'll talk about in a second, and actually doing prototyping with the goal that when we do this, we kind of test out ideas and see how they work. Often go back to stakeholders and be like, is this what you're thinking about? And get that feedback, because often people don't really know exactly what they're actually asking until they actually see it. And also find ways that this can help better funding opportunities. So effectively to be like, this is the stuff we've done. When we go to apply for funding, it becomes much more evident that we can actually do the thing we're talking about. And this is going to be a fun one. There's some really interesting ones they have in that group. Part of the thing we're also trying to figure out, and this is why Emma being on the call is perfect. Like we're trying to understand this idea of like how we support data and data services and questions in the state of Vermont. Like I grew up in Bennington. I left for a while and came back to Burlington about 15 years ago. Like the ability to both have access to policymakers, people that impact the state is like really remarkable. I can talk to a lot of different people and actually have really amazing conversations. And the ability to add capacity to like understand things is really relevant. And that's part of why I'm here is like having talked to Dora before this and kind of exploring like how can UVM, how can students, how can researchers add capacity to problems. And this is kind of like we were exploring that concept of like how we pull in problems from the community, how we think about developing solutions like we've talked about above, and then how to deliver something that's functionally useful. Exploring this was the creation of a project bank that I've been working on. It's just like literally, there's a lot here. There's even more in reality, but I didn't want the text to get too small. But exploring these concepts of like what is out there, like how do you find the needs, find the gaps where organizations may not actually be able to do things for it, and then be able to connect all those pieces together where like we can help deliver that solution. Renee, I think you are not on mute if you don't want to be. Um, so if like some of those are relations to childcare pieces, some of those are in relation to environmental pieces, some of those are in relation to water pieces, some of those are in relation to like things around environmental pieces, and trying to understand how those all interact. Um, so like I just kind of combined a lot of stuff fairly quickly, with the goal of kind of setting this next question for you. So like I'm trying to understand coming into this, like where are there key missing pieces that advance the welfare of children and families that you are interested in, and who are the key users that can change that picture. Because speaking as a product manager, like the problem and who uses that problem is very relevant, and how those things combine, and where are there gaps between organizations that have very specific focused solutions, and what crosses those things, what brings the whole ecosystem together in a way that actually can advance the larger story. Things like the wastewater project that we're doing is building wastewater data map exists partially because most of the state agencies are focused on conservation and water like safety. They don't necessarily have like a mission to create maps that help people do policy around how do we think about creating bonds for wastewater. The zoning atlas, like every town has a need to create zoning laws, but there wasn't an organization that kind of pulled together like, well, if we put this all together as a comprehensive piece, we can think about how we change this. I see a lot of alignment with BBF and how they think about some of the data problems and trying to build some of those pieces. And like this is not my I don't know this part as well. So I'm going to stop talking for a second and ask for questions or responses to these two questions. I think I only see some of you, so if raising your hand. Any thoughts? I'm gonna call on Dora just to kick it off.
Oh my goodness. Um, no pressure. I think that we met earlier this week, and I really do want to hear from others about what are some of the things that are. Kendall, I wonder if you can go back to the question bank, and maybe make it a little bit bigger, and like think use this as a bit of a starting point. Eh, if that makes sense, or because I really would love to hear from others.
Yeah,
Emily.
Emily.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. This is very interesting. I was wondering if you could speak to how you navigate data sharing agreements and MOUs and, you know, facilitating the data collection from all these different entities, pulling it and then producing these types of products.
Yeah, like the advantage of the work that we're doing right now is we're doing work with the state, and the state wants the state to be open. So like all the zoning like laws are open. So converting that to a geospatial data set is just use what's there and do it. The wastewater stuff is often open. Like the state has collected some of this. Anything that we're able to add to it that wasn't previously open, they want to be open. Like I am not in the space of trying to create data sets that aren't supposed to be open. Like I don't like if we're sitting there saying like, well, like on these conditions, this data can be released, like only to select people that have to sign into it. Like that's I'm not that kind of person. That's not the kind of work I do. There are people that do that. That's not me. So like I'm specifically looking for data sets that can be open, that people can access and use no matter what. So it helps kind of alleviate some of that problem. It constrains some of the things that I do, obviously, but I think it still can produce quite a bit inside of that space. And usually when we're in those questions of like this data set is closed, I usually ask why. And if the question is like, well, it's to protect it from like private information, like yeah, sure, keep it closed. That's completely fine. If the data is because they're concerned about someone else taking an idea or something else, or they often don't think about like what impact they're trying to drive. I usually have the conversation about like, well, if you want this information to actually change something, you actually have to share it, and you have to share it clearly with good like supporting materials. I'm in the middle of rebuilding the Vermont Zoning Atlas page to that exact goal of like how do I actually communicate like the data that I have, how to contribute to it, and how to use it, because that isn't easy, and it makes those things a little bit clearer. So I haven't had deep problems with that yet, and I imagine at some point I'll start hitting some of those boundaries, but I'm not sure where yet.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, and I think you've hit upon one of the issues when it comes to early childhood data is some of the data I'd want is protected data,
Yeah.
number one. And number two, some of the data I would normally want, I don't feel comfortable asking for in the current administration, not local, but federal,
Yeah.
because of safety concerns and issues. You know, if something is on a database, once it's there, it can, if it's public, it can be seen, and if it's private, it can be subpoenaed. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting conundrum right now when we don't know what's going on.
Um, I hear the whole like this has been a challenging week. So like there's a lot of the stuff. Your points are very valid, and there's been instances where people have reversed openness because of dangers like that. Not only political dangers, but like people using data to against negative for negative reasons. Like I think things like housing data, you're like, okay, so telling us where we can build usually isn't a negative thing in the realm of like you still have zoning laws to prevent building. Like there's reasons those two things interact well. And it is complicated. I think of like if you're trying to think about the impact you're creating with child issues, like I don't need to see individual children's data, but aggregated like demographic stuff or like I mean the thing I've been doing like summer camps. Oh my God, trying to like create a database of summer camps is like challenging my best data. I'm literally going to build a MySQL database to do this. Like those kinds of things are not necessarily private information and can be shared. So like where are the things you can drive value with stuff that is shareable? And yes, it's useful to be cautious and thoughtful about it. Data shouldn't
Yeah,
be shared. Just
especially even aggregated, I worry. You know,
yeah,
I with some of the data just because it still has to be hosted somewhere. And so I worry, you know,
when you say
it's
hosting,
something.
like what do you mean
Well,
by that? Like who has the data, or like what do you mean by that statement?
yeah, who has it, what they're doing with it. When I think of like the newest executive order for trans kids, I don't know that I want them, even if it's protected health information in a computer database somewhere right now. You know,
Yeah,
it's not safe for them or trans adults.
I think for the space I'm in, I have to worry less about that because that's not the kind of data I'd ever play with. And yeah, like it's useful to think about that. Aaron, why don't you go?
Okay.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you. Sorry, I had to like lower my hand and do all that. Um, so I noticed Eric put in the chat something about the Vermont Child Care Finder, and maybe not surprisingly, my interest is piqued in that as well. I feel like I'm not aware of what that is currently. I feel like the system that we have is the system that we've always had, which has seemed very antiquated, and efforts to have a system to find childcare have been challenging to implement. And so I guess I wanted to know more about what that is, and how we can make sure people know about it, and like where the data is coming from to populate it, because efforts I've been part of in the past have been really challenging. When you talk about summer camps,
Yeah.
I think summer camps are a subset of childcare, and so I guess I'd like to know more about that and how, like, what you've gone through to make that happen. And
Mm.
I also feel like we get questions all the time about, so how many children are in childcare in Vermont? Which seems like a question we ought to be able to answer. Like that's like the most basic question, and yet we really can't answer that. And anyway, I don't know. I have a lot of questions,
Yeah.
but that's the one that really right away jumped out at me. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the Child Care Finder and what it
Yeah.
is and what you think it
I,
could be and how it could get there.
I should absolutely clarify. These are things that haven't been built yet. I have not solved that problem to make, because the reason it's
That
hard.
makes more sense.
Yes. So like part of this, okay, so we'll take a couple pieces of that. Like, um, I had met with someone at the Child Resource Center at an event, and we just kind of started talking about this. I know when I was looking for childcare for my, I now have a 5-year-old, but when I first was doing that, it was in the middle of COVID, and the way to get that was like these like data pulls that you got that weren't really particularly formatted for searching and required like knowing Excel how to use them, and trying to think about like why isn't this geospatially located in a way that I can say, find me all the childcare centers in 25 miles that have like capacity for a 5-year-old. Like these things are really basic data like problems to solve, and getting that information is really hard. To your point of like how many children are in childcare, like I always challenge any company I've ever worked for to tell me how many clients they have, because often they never really are able to know at any given time how many clients they actually have. It's the same thing with this, like knowing how many children in childcare facilities. Like, that's a really complicated problem to answer. And does 80% get you most of the way there? Yeah, probably. Um, and that final percentage, like what is where do you get that, and why? What is the variables you have to think about? Um, the child care finder is something that I think of like the summer camp database that I've been playing with, trying to solve my own problem. To do that, I have had to create, like, I've created sortable fields that involve age and grade because they do it different ways. They have different time periods. They have different days of like time start and end times. They have different age ranges, and some of those age ranges are like really specifically weird. They have different locations, so how close they are, and like these data problems have been solved 1,000 different ways in every other field. Like it's just aggregating and gathering this in a bunch of non-standard formats across 1,000 websites that are released like a week or two before the like submission date because they're trying to like reduce their demand. I mean, like all these things are there's a cultural aspect of how we think about those problems and how we actually sit there and say, hey, what if we create a database that you submit your things to? We handle all the registration process and giving you all the best fits for you, and like thinking about that as a different shift. Like I think of childcare and like actually being able to understand the demand in a single place to feed it to the like capacity and understand that programmatically is, if we can do this for all the tweets in the world, we sure as hell can do this for this problem. It's just who manages it, how do we build it, and how do we keep it up to date. So like this project bank is a place where I'm like, I'm finding partners and I'm like, A, can we solve this problem? B, can we find the right users for it? So like, who are we solving it for? And C, can we find funding to run this kind of work? Like the childcare finder like has a bunch of data. Like I think there's possibilities to build that, and like finding the right partners to ask the right questions and know this field better than me when working with students is really relevant. And it's evolving thing.
For sure. And I feel like I and others here have done a lot of work
Yeah.
towards this. And I don't think it's actually that hard. I think it just requires participation, honestly,
Like
and like
coordination in some ways.
promotion from
Yeah.
someone who has like relative power in the situation.
And I think some of these things, I think like having children is kind of like PTSD. Like you get done, and you don't want to try to remember the difficulty of it. So like it's the same thing with elder care. Like having elderly parents, having done some of that, you get done with that experience. You're like, I don't want to ever think about this again. So there's these pieces of like, how do we carry that interest through to make that pain translate to something that actually solves it? Like, I no longer have to search for childcare. I'm in the Burlington School District. Well, no, actually, I have to definitely search for childcare because it doesn't go all the time. But still, like these things are very like transitory. It's like having these places of like the childcare thing, or even like one of the ones I have in there is a unified social services application where you just apply one place and it creates all the applications for everything that applies to you. Like those are computationally solvable, and programmatically difficult to get everyone to accept those things and work together to understand that. So I think it's a piece of like how we coordinate some of these problems and be like, okay, like to do unified social services, what do you actually need to know to do that work? Do you need to know like this adjusted gross income with this variable and this variable, or do you just need to know this? And if we can do that, then we can unify these things. And that's taking a bunch of people that are in their silos and breaking them out and be like, what do you actually need to do make decisions? It's often less, and people um, in my experience, people often make it more complicated because it's a way to show that they are good at what they do, not because it's necessarily necessary. Like a bunch of forums will be like ask you questions that you don't care about them knowing, but they want to know because it'd be nice for them. Like there's a value trade in understanding users inside of that space. Okay, I'm kind of wandering a little bit there. Sorry.
No, that's great.
And
Thank you.
I cannot hear you. You're still muted, Anne.
So sorry. Thank you
That's
for
right.
all your ideas, and it really gets the wheels turning. There are so many data challenges. I work in the Child Development Division at the state of Vermont. We're trying to, we don't have a statewide database for children's integrated services, which is the program I work on, and so that's a huge need, and we're trying to work on it. But anyway, I wanted to ask you a specific question, well, two specific questions if there's time. One is that do you slice data in different ways, or could you, than it's typically sliced if it already exists? And I know I saw Dave Kelly put a question in the chat about the American Community Survey and population. So are the regions that we use for children's integrated services do not align exactly with the Agency of Human Services regions or, school districts or counties. And we want to know the population of children under the age of 5, let's say, it's more complicated than that, in our different regions. And we've tried to do some like estimation around it using breaking things out by town, but it's very difficult. That was one thing. And then just to add on the other thing, if you have time, mapping playgrounds that are accessible to young children, like children under the age of 3 or children under the age of 5. Not just where are the playgrounds, but where are they for the younger children?
There was a version of that where I was talking to my partner about creating a map of public restrooms, and having people add photos so you kind of see how crappy that restroom is. So if you're going to bring like a 2-year-old in or a 5-year-old, like what are you going to be going into when you're doing that? I think the misalignment of regions is like it's like a drinking game in Vermont. It's insane. Like there's all these things that don't align, and you're like, so why? Like a part of this is the fact that we don't have counties in the way that many states do. We don't use counties in that same function of like, here's an aggregator, here's a common aggregator, and build services around that. The regional planning commissions are kind of fascinating for that. They have a different grouping of things, and like there are ways geospatially to cut data, where you like divide things, and if you have data at enough of a resolution, so like think like census tracts, right? If you can cut things around census tracts, then you'll probably get a pretty close proximity to like what the data is going to be. And like there is a deeply seated question of why these things are never aligning. Like, why is there a difference? Like, understanding that core piece of why we bifurcate and silo these organizations fundamentally by organizing these things in different ways. Something like I'm really curious to understand who makes those decisions. Like, can we change that? Like, I know school districts is now up on the wall from like Phil's recommendation of moving to 5. I like doing the zoning atlas. We are a state of 650,000 people. That's smaller than like the suburbs of Boston, and we have 200 and what was it, 259 towns. We had 1,700 like zoning jurisdictions. Like, why? Why is this complicated? Why are we making it this complicated? Does it actually solve the problem we're trying to solve or not? I think that's kind of something that's a question that I know you probably can't answer, but it's something I'm like who designs this and how can we make this things align better? If you want pieces to drop through, how do you sit there? Yes, thank you. 251 towns. Like, how do you think about reorganize that to be more effective? And that requires a cultural conversation that crosses a lot of boundaries and thinking about that. And I'm not sure exactly how to mitigate that. So I think that's kind of a piece to what you're talking about and trying to figure that piece out. There are ways, and it's ugly, and we're having the same thing with the zoning atlas of like adding it to the wastewater districts, which have often are in towns, but not entirely, and then you have like regional planning districts that have a different set of towns, and you talk about like school districts with all the housing data. Like, if you have housing, or you building your schools, like those are different. Like, it's messy, and doesn't need to be, but it is messy. So like, it's gonna be complicated to figure out how to cut those in the right way. I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. Um, I haven't been deeply in the chat, so I'm gonna see if there's any questions that I'm missing in there.
Kendall, just to follow up on what you were saying, one of those cuts to me in the American Community Survey that I have never quite utilized or gotten enough access to is this concept of place. And when I look at it, the place variable looks like it's sort of town, but maybe zip code or something like that. So it might provide the granularity. And that's what my question related to. Have you ever, for an organization, set up a feed from the American Community Survey that was utilizing place as
Yeah.
sort of a more granular metric for things like, I think this group would be interested in like the social opportunity index and the child opportunity index.
I'm not familiar with that data set, so the answer is no. I have not played with that, and I'd be intrigued to see
Yeah,
how that can relate to all the other things, because I think it sounds like it very much would.
I think it might. And maybe I'll give you a call offline to
Yeah.
see if I can what I can get out of you for free. Um,
I think there's like I I hope what part of this does is take a bunch of different specialists in different fields and be like, if we add this data together, what do we understand better?
mhm.
What actions can we take that are more informed? Because we sit there and say, well, like I just think of the housing one as such a great one because it's like I want to build new houses in Vermont. Okay, like A, can you? Are you allowed? B, do you have infrastructure that allows you to build bigger houses there? C, do you have schools that can support if you actually add people there that can actually support that? D, do you have jobs or companies that are going to hire? Like, all these things really impact the question of housing, and it's often like not easily put together in a way that people can understand it. And the policy making and community discussions, like you can't give them a geospatial data set and be like, figure this out. Like, there's storytelling that's required to make this stuff actually function. And we're trying to understand how to do that. Like, my background in arts has become amazingly relevant when I think about storytelling.
Yeah.
And we're still trying to figure out like who are the users? Who are the people? Is it legislators? Is it town city councilors? Is it like individual populations? Is it nonprofits? Like, and we're trying to figure out how to tell the story to each one of those to allow them to explore it and think about those questions.
My town actually has a high housing issue that's kind of speaks to your point about it, how contextual it can be. I live in Plainfield, and we lost 10% of our grand list to a flood last
Yeah.
July. And so now there's a proposal to put in like a town field a new low income housing to like replace the value of that grand list. And so there are zillions of questions from everyone in town about every different zoning aspect of that, Kendall. And I they I don't think they produced a map yet, other than the map of the new site. The map doesn't include sort of the whole picture of what happened, it, you know, on the brook during the flood.
Yeah, like the flooding habits have changed, so like we're trying to understand that too, like where it floods and at what intensity is changing. So like all those questions of like, is it safe to build places we've built before? Is often the answer is no, stuff's moved. Or the fact that like a lot of infrastructure is in like on the shore of a river, and you're like, well, that's not great.
Right.
Like what? Like Montpelier, like the high school is like in a floodplain. You're like, well, I feel like maybe we should think about like how that what happens when you lose that entire system. Like I don't know. There's lots of a- and it's hard to have informed conversations because it takes so much time to understand them. So trying to find ways to get people to understand it quicker makes that happen a lot better. But that isn't easy. That takes time to figure that out.
Absolutely. I think it's about access, right? And it's about like doing some of the work that's being done once or a couple of times and being maintained instead of every development needing to go and get those same you know 25 different data sets for this specific place. So how are we sort of building on that efficiency? And I think that again, that some of these project banks are doing that similar work. The how many of us have wanted to use census data in X, Y, and Z way, and like we are doing the massaging, and whether or not a project has access to that is based on resources instead of sort of making it more universally available. And so I think part of Kendall coming into this space is thinking together about like what are those there are so many gaps across all of our work, and where are there is there a use case, or like where are these opportunities for using this resource of Kendall's students or partnering to be able to think through what this child find might mean, and how like Kendall, you're using the experts in this space to make that a usable tool, or you know figure out if it's not feasible, right? So I think there's a lot of the like really technical stuff, which I think some people in this room are like all about. And then I think there's also the practical applications and thinking about what, and the historical institutional knowledge that's held by the folks in this space, as well as partners and associates.
The element of open data is like the reason I had that in there is thinking about how the information that you hold wherever you are is actually accessible to others in a way that people can understand what that data is. And if you're like, I have this cool data set, can interact with the things that are in the stuff that BBF has inside of their data portal, like those are relevant questions. Like if I add that data with something they have, can I get good insights? Is the data comparable? Is it a different resolution? Is it at state? Is it towns? Like these thinking about that strategically as you're doing this and being like identifying what you have and understanding what it can work with outside of it will help you understand what you can do next. And I think that's a strategic piece of going through that and being like, what do you actually have? Is it open? Is it understandable? Is there some weird like definite like definitions from like we did this in zoning atlas, definitions of like what is frontage is like a thing, right? Like what does that mean for everything? Like is that consistent? So there's some strategic pieces around trying to think through those problems. There was one question in the chat. How do you monitor the use of these products or applications? We are still fairly new. Like we've only been doing this for a year and change of building things. So the problem of monitoring or like getting analytics from it is not the highest priority as versus just having it all function the way we want it to function. I think the ideal is we actually have like our Google Analytics and all the applications. We see that feedback. And the question is for some of those, do I want to have that information? Is that something I want to keep or maintain or hold or analyze? Is it worth it to deal with that extra work? Not for everything. I also expect, hopefully, the stuff I make other people take and take in a different direction. So like once it does that, it's beyond my world. Like I'll never see it in the same way. I won't see the work that they're doing. And that's kind of the fun of it, is you can be surprised what people do with your stuff when they start exploring it, and they're given the ability to do that. You have other things on your agenda, so I think I should stop talking and let you guys move on to the next piece. It was a pleasure to meet all of you.
Thank you so much, Kendall. You know, I think one of the things that I'm most excited about is getting even this group of exceptional partners who are deep in the weeds of data, whether it's state agency data or community data, to think differently about what's possible, or what have we already tried and what hasn't worked. So I really appreciated Aaron, you know, the things on the screen that came up for me too were childcare, pre-K, after school and out of school time care, and ways to visualize what is available for kids and families across this, you know, this spectrum. And it could be CIS. Like, how could we think about giving families access to information about what is available to them across the state in a more meaningful way, in a centralized way? And I think that there are so many potential use cases for all of this work, but really appreciate you and Emma being here. Emily, I don't want to cut you off. You get the last word.
Sorry, just a really quick last thing. If you had one recommendation for a group of partners who collect data differently across all of their spaces, but wanted to make it accessible for folks to use, what would your one recommendation or starting point be?
I think probably the easiest thing is to find the common problem that you're trying to solve with all that data. Because when you do that, when you're like, oh, what if we try to figure out this thing? Getting all the data aligned then becomes just, oh, we just need to figure that part out. Like if you don't have a good, like, I guess it'd be a research question, but a good question, like a good reason to actually try to work together, like inevitably nothing else comes out of it. So if you're like trying to solve, like, I think I'm gonna just go to summer camps because it's in my brain at this point. Like if I'm like, you know, what does summer camps impact? Does it impact like getting food? Is like, does summer camp actually have food? Accessibility, who has money for it? Like there's undoubtedly people in this call that have pieces of those things. You're like, so how do we solve accessibility to summer camps and then show the value of that being accessible? Then you start saying there and be like, well, what kind of resolution do we need? Like, who has that data? How do we think about restructuring this so it does work at this level? So, like, having a unifying question and start communicating. I don't know, like, so I'm used to it in tech spaces. We often have like Slacks and like, I have a Discord I run with all the students that's just like open that allows us to like get people in and talk about stuff. Having a place for you to have discussions with each other and ask a question, and if people respond to that, is a place where you can start building those things. And like communication is a key part of that, is finding ways that you can share communication. There's a BTV Dev is a development tech Slack that exists in Burlington that is literally like, I don't know who manages it. I don't think anyone actually does. And it's just a place where like if you're a developer, no matter where you're working, you just jump in there. You can ask questions about jobs, like get help for things, run tech events, and it allows us to ask questions of each other. Like, does anyone know how to do this thing? And like someone will post it up, and you'd be like, oh, that's cool. I hadn't thought about that. And you kind of do that. So thinking about how you communicate those questions, then actually aggregate people around that problem, will make the data resolution problem become really necessary rather than just inconvenient.
Awesome. Emily, way to end with a hard question. Like it. Thanks, Kendall and Emma, for being with us. I do want to transition us to talking a little bit more about some of the tensions, challenges, and limitations that we have in our data and how this committee wants to move forward in an advisement capacity. So at BBF and through the State Advisory Council Network, there's so many different ways that we advise decision makers across the board. And some of those involve policy recommendations. And this committee has been so strong in helping develop policy recommendations over time. So every single year for the past 5, at least as long as I have been here, there's been a series of recommendations that we are issuing either to the legislature because something needs to happen in their scope or purview, or to the administration and broader the early childhood system to say, okay, here's what needs to be prioritized in the data space. And so I want to ask a couple of questions to spark some discussion with this group about, one, how can we leverage the previous recommendations? Because I think we all are very clear on the fact that we haven't nailed all of them. And it's not as if we've seen every single investment or change that we've been looking to see. So want to, again, have this group be very aware that when we issue policy recommendations, we don't want them to just sit. We actually want to be continuously talking about them. So I'm going to ask Dora or Kitty or Hannah, to go back and pull in the links to those policy recs so that the committee, especially for the notes, will have access to the series of policy recommendations, especially from this Committee on Data and Evaluation components. But the first question is around how we think about our previous policy recommendations, and if there's anything that you would like to see us be doing differently with them this session as we're coming in and teaching the legislature about the advisory role and communicating about this information to committee members. The second, and I'll come back to that first question in just a minute. The second is, we want to put out there to this committee the opportunity to develop something like a collaborative data brief on the existing data systems and infrastructure in the state of Vermont. So all of us have continuously said, okay, here's our data system or lack thereof. Here are our Excel files that we are using to do this thing, or this was built in this century and here's where we are now still using, right? And this is something that Wendy Geller, who was previously at the Agency of Education, and I had talked about for a long time and just hadn't been able to prioritize. So we're bringing that back to this committee to say, do you think there would be value in having a subgroup of people come together to do some of that documentation and publish a data brief on our current data systems, infrastructure, and capacity needs, and mapping them to our State Advisory Council recommendations on the things that we value and care about? And the last question I want to talk about in this section is, what are the ways that we can be thinking differently about how we are connecting all of our different data systems and work to support data-driven decision-making? So very similar to what Kendall was talking about. How are we centralizing? What are the different opportunities that we aren't maximizing right now? And then, talking a little bit more about what's possible to connect those systems. So I want to go back. I gave you the preview. And the first question I want to ask through this committee is, how are you currently, or how should we collectively be using previous policy recommendations on data systems, infrastructure, and capacity? Are there opportunities that you see coming into this session where you think we need to be highlighting different pieces and mechanisms? Or are there other things that you want us to be thinking about? And I'll give you an example while you're thinking, because I'm putting you all on the spot. I won't cold call on you teacher style just yet. Just yet. But one of the things that I'm thinking about is our recommendations on the importance and the value of data on universal pre-kindergarten education as we are thinking about making major decisions in transforming our education system. What is the capacity? What are the infrastructure needs? What are the data systems needs? I'm thinking about the Children's Integrated Services data system. I'm thinking about this year's policy recommendations on the data that we need related to the child welfare system. I'm thinking about, Act 76 monitoring, and that we've done some phenomenal work in expanding capacity in childcare and supporting businesses. And what do we know about data on workforce and economic impact, and where is their ability to expand our team's capacity to do this well? So just wanting to again, have you all be thinking about some of the recommendations that we've made in the past few years, and what do you want us to be prioritizing? How do you want us to be using those? And where are you already using those? And if you're not, where could we be? Renee and then Emily.
Oh, can I let Emily go first?
Sure.
Not exactly an answer to your question, but another question in response to your question. The last, say, the bank of recommendations that have come out of our body of work and adjacent bodies of work over the last, let's say, 5 years, are we tracking barriers to implementation of those recommendations and understanding what the implication of those barriers are to future recommendations? Like, are we, if a recommendation hasn't moved forward in the last 3 years, understanding why that is, and is there a recommendation that we have that speaks to fixing that barrier, or are we just rephrasing things and putting them forward again in a different way to different people? I think that would kind of be my starting baseline question of that speaks to the feasibility of the recommendations that we have on the table now and future recommendations.
Such a good series of questions, Emily, and it's so interesting. The best example I can come up with is our recommendations on CIS. So I'm looking particularly at Anne and thinking about over the last at least 5 years since I have been in this role, we've made a series of recommendations about the Children's Integrated Services data system or data capacity, the infrastructure. And one of the things that I have found in working with those teams is that the challenge changes over time. Sometimes the challenge is we don't have enough money. Sometimes it's we don't have capacity. Sometimes there's a leadership change and the priority or the direction changes. So, to your point about monitoring the impact or the tensions and barriers around policy recs, I think we can be doing a better job of that and recognizing that those things are shifting depending on the project or priority. However, I think that overall what we've seen is that we have antiquated data systems across the board and a lack of capacity both inside of state government and a lack of ability or capacity or understanding of those needing to collect and provide that data about what that looks like and how to build this broader I don't want to say training, but kind of buy-in to why it's valuable to provide information, but also that we aren't overdoing it and over collecting it and overburdening. So I think one of the things that our team's thinking about in this next year is that more formal process of the monitoring of barriers and challenges to policy recs, but also if we haven't seen movement on them, is it not just revising, but is it bringing it back into the next year? So in this most recent year, we have actually brought them back and said, hey, this was not something that was prioritized. It's still something that's critical. I also think, especially for this committee to be thinking about coming into the next year, where do those pieces need to fall into the strategic plan for the early childhood system? And then even more broadly, that vision for the protocol for data-driven decision-making in early childhood that we've put together, right? Are all of those things represented around improving systems, data quality, capacity? Renee.
Debating whether to say let Kitty go and see how often we can just snowball. So just first, Kendall, loved the presentation. I came a few minutes late, so I refrained from asking a bunch of questions or getting involved because you probably covered it in the first 10 minutes of the meeting that I missed. But as someone who does my own GIS mapping kind of at my desk at work, like trying to figure out how to do the mapping and do those pieces, I was like, oh, hey, here's another person using data sets to map. So that got me super excited. Morgan, like I love the questions, always thinking about data and these pieces. I think as Dora put the recs in the chat and then I went to take a look at them and refresh myself. And I think what jumped out at me was thinking about how our policy recommendation, which I agree with wholeheartedly, is aligning that demographic data collection. But I think too, there's like these different areas that we can focus on. And when I looked at that, I was like, oh gosh, we put a policy rec that's about more collection. And I feel like we do so much collection and we don't create the space to intentionally think about linking them or how we link them. So that was like the first initial thing is like, oh gosh, we said that we just wanted to align collection instead of, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I'm like, gosh, we have so much data. Is there anything that we can do in terms of linking and not thinking about how we collect more data? Because like I am still trying to think about how we get data out, and I completely agree with you in terms of the pre-K data sets. And Dave Kelly, it is so great to see your name on my screen this morning. I'll be following up, but thinking about the Head Start data that we have access to, and but that capacity piece, and Emily, your point about like, what do we do? Do we keep renewing these recommendations? Do we track these barriers? And I feel like we're also always pinned against these two constraints of like, well, do you want resources to do systems building and or do you want the money for direct service, right? Like that's the kind of pie that we're forced into, is no one necessarily wants to take the investment to develop those systems or to prioritize staff time or resources to build them because there's just too much other stuff going on. So all of that mushed together to be said, like, I appreciate our current policy rec, but as we think about the work moving forward, not that I want to lose traction there, but we have so much data. And so thinking about what is the trick to getting the capacity to create some space to analyze, because we can't keep doing what we're doing, which is like responding really quickly. And the pre-K committee, I think, was an example of that. It's like people are saying they want systems to change, but we haven't invested in our data system to actually get the information to make good, sound decisions off of what those changes should be based on the data. So I don't have the silver solution by any means, but I do appreciate this opportunity to come together and think with partners about what do we have and what do we link? What is more open source? Like, I came in the conversation of that. It's like, if it's open source, let's play with it. We're not even touching anything else right now, but like, what are those small wins? And how within our own agencies can leadership really prioritize the time for folks to do that? Because I've got a lot of data collection work in my day to day, and it becomes a lot when we're not investing in the system, and then it does fall on the individuals to just try to pull that together, and that's not a good approach to data-driven decision making in our system.
Thank you, Renee. Maybe we should have had Kitty gone first because you transitioned into the other two questions, but I really appreciate it and we'll come back to it. Go ahead, Kitty.
Yeah. I realize I'm within BBF and we have these internal conversations, but just to bring it to like the full group, I think being able to emphasize the value of resource like that positions for like data analysts and people working specifically with data, being able to focus on that resource in organizations and continuing to have that resource. I think going off of what Renee is saying, there being a lot of data, but there needing to be like this emphasis on focus. And I think just having those positions and focus on that within organizations really emphasizes the value of it. And I know we obviously have, that's, I think that's something that just came up as a thought for me to focus on.
I'm glad that you raised that, Kitty, because when I look across the room, there are so many partners and colleagues who are working under some of the federal grants that we've written, who are in this space and have built data capacity across a range of teams to support the work and the effort. And how do we maintain progress and the ability to both have people who are executing and doing that work, but those of you who we need to be in that strategic thinking place of, oh, how are we utilizing this data and how are we using it to inform decision making, or how are we linking it, and needing to free up capacity for you all to be doing that work, and then looking at it related to our outcomes, right? Like how do we know if we're making an impact for things, not just doing the federal reporting on the things. And I think that's a step that, everyone across the country is dealing with, right? Like, we're collecting so much data, we're reporting it to the feds, but what are we actually doing with it? And how do we utilize it within our teams? How do we help others utilize it and use it to make decisions? So that's something that I think we should continue to talk about. And I'm going to pause on the data brief conversation and ask you all, especially as we're thinking about how we connect data, how we think about the existing data systems that we have and the amount of data. How much capacity are you all having, or what time are you spending thinking about just your data versus, oh, I have this data set and here are the 4 ways that I could make this connection and what it would mean for pre-K, Head Start, childcare. Are you thinking about any of those pieces?
Amy Schaefer, I'm going to put you on the spot because you sent me an email about this. And I think this would be a great group to talk about that with.
Didn't even mean to tee you up, Amy. I'm sorry, but also thank you.
I will be honest right now because my mind is going in like 12 different directions. If somebody could
Totally.
just recap the last,
Yes, this
Dora,
was,
sorry.
so this was you had, and this was an email from a while ago. So,
Okay.
Amy had reached out to talk about, if about unique IDs and if unique IDs are assigned at birth and what that linking looks like, right? And this sort of links in with Renee, what you were talking about with not just collecting more data, but that linking, right? And Terry was sharing through our PDG data analyst chat that there is a unique ID assigned at birth, but it doesn't seem like it's transitioning to other AHS, AOE data systems.
I'm sorry, Dora, go ahead. I did quickly read your email this morning in between meetings, and you know, that had me thinking more and more about, okay, that response, it seemed like it's more, you know, public health data, knowing very little, just kind of going with how the response was written. And just more the cautionary tale about if it's, you know, would we run into difficulty with an identifier that's used for that purpose and end up with essentially confidentiality issues if we pulled that number along. That was my immediate response when I saw your email this morning. I think it's still worth discussing because I honestly can't think of another way of how we would track education for children from birth to, you know, even all the way through high school, without having that common element.
So a part of the reason that Dora is bringing this up is because, you know, a lot of the folks in this room have been talking, again, far before my time back in Vermont, about this idea of unique IDs and linking data and where to link that data, and have started having those conversations. I'm looking at Renee Kelly and Dave Kelly and Heather Madison, who isn't on the phone today, and others who have spent so much time thinking about, okay, if we had a unique ID, who holds it? How early does it start? And then how would we all have that? Like, what are the common elements of the file that need to be in place in order to match and monitor that type of system? So that is a part of the question. How many of you are even thinking about those types of things in your work? Or is it really that you are focused on your silo of the data? And how could we start to, again, have additional conversations about that, recognizing that there are efforts going on, right? In talking with the Agency of Digital Services, there's conversations around how to do this around Medicaid. There are sectors that are starting to link and think about those things. And so we don't want to duplicate efforts, but how do we think about that for the early childhood system across childcare and Head Start and early childhood education and children's integrated services and mental health? Like, what are those things that we should be thinking about right now? And do you have the capacity to start engaging in that conversation again?
Morgan, that's actually why Department of Health popped in my brain, because, you know, it really does start once the baby is born. If the baby has health needs and parents are accessing services for any kind of special health needs, and that ends up carrying through, it seemed like the logical place to start. I'm excited about the conversation because I do think it's a tough nut to crack, but one's that's certainly worth looking at for sure.
So I don't want to halt the conversation, but I do want to name, especially for our state agency leaders who are responsible for data, we might be pulling in a subgroup of you to start having more of those conversations around linking to make sure that, again, early childhood partners aren't so siloed from bigger conversations that might be happening at the Agency of Human Services around Medicaid and around unique IDs. And so making sure that everyone's on the same page. We've started initiating and having conversations with ADS where they're giving us a lot of insight into that. I know the Agency of Education is talking about a ton of transformation in how they are prioritizing data. So I want to make sure, especially our state agency data teams are aware of all of those things that are happening and are brought into that conversation. And I am not going to shut down the conversation because two Aarons would like to speak. So Aaron Roche and then Aaron Olikin.
Well, two things. One is that, I love data and I love all the like connections and like opportunities for finding linkages. But to Kaya's point earlier, I feel like the more we connect up these things in one universal way, the more like, anyway, the more that individuals don't have any knowledge or control over their own personal information. And that right in this moment feels really concerning. And so I want to say that, but I also wanted to say, connected to that I think it was David Kelly that said, oh yeah, well, we have a number and it follows you from your first. And yet every time my kid goes back to school, I have to give you the same emergency contact and the same doctor's phone number and like, if you're going to do this, if you're going to like start to create some digital record, then you darn well better do it so that it benefits the people whose data you're collecting. And I get really offended about it. I just think that we're doing it because we're just like nerdy, interested in data, and we think we're going to like address the greater good with this. But if you're not addressing the good of the individuals, then I don't really know that that's what you're doing. So anyway, I just had to say that.
So here's what I appreciate more than ever in this space today is that people are very much so in the practical here's the moment we're in, here's what's most important right now, and how do we do what's best for kids and families and communities versus how do we just continue doing data work or do whatever the status quo work is just because. And so I want you to stay in that space, because if we can have movement in a smaller way on very concrete things for kids and families, let's figure out what those things are. It doesn't have to be business as usual. And if we are maintaining that vision for how we are making at least data available to decision makers in meaningful ways, what could that mean and how could that look different versus adjusting the linking on the back end or, the kind of systems level things behind the scenes? What are the other ways that this group in particular can work really hard to elevate the right data, the most high quality, what we know right now, in a way that's meaningful and not harmful to individuals, especially hearing, Kaya and Aaron's points around what it could mean to be talking about specific populations or even providing data or information on certain topics. And so how we as a group are really sensitive and mindful, but also making each other aware of where it's really important to do that or not. Aaron Olikin, and then Kaya.
Thank you. So from where I am in the Reach Up program, I'm thinking about areas in which there are overlap, particularly in the 2-gen or whole family approach, and looking at some of those principles of that approach. And so the two I thought of, which are, I think, pretty concrete examples, are asset development and housing. And those are things that because when we look at outcomes for young children and the adults in their lives, for example, if there is more income in the household and assets are built, they have better outcomes as adults. And so where is that overlap with looking at where are the kids in Vermont and what resources are they accessing and during this time of critical brain development? And so for Reach Up, one of our statutory purpose is that we measure the program by what's best for children. And so kind of bringing us back to all of us to think about what are those outcomes that we want to see for Vermont kids, and then what are those data sets that overlap for those to achieve those outcomes. And so housing also comes up for me as a really big thing that we all have pieces of. And whether it's because, you know, an early childhood program is working with kids that they know are experiencing homelessness, and how do they get them connected to maybe Reach Up, or they need a family shelter or emergency housing, and then and how do we all kind of come together to address that incredibly critical need in the state by looking at those data sets and in complement to each other.
Thank you so much, Erin. Yeah.
So, Erin, I really appreciate what you said, some of what I was thinking to both Erins. And I also think this is a place, if we're getting back, if we start talking about what I brought up and what Erin brought up when it comes to safety, is also start thinking about what are other ways of data collecting, like qualitative data or things that we can use to still display what is going on without making people feel at risk. But it's something we need to talk about and we need to think about and wonder, what data do we need? What are alternate ways of getting that data that protect people's identities, and where do we go from here? Because I mean, it could be as simple as if we had a universal database and someone was looking for a provider that spoke Farsi, that might identify them as someone from a part of the world, and then that database gets subpoenaed. We have some responsibility too right now when it comes to data collection and storage and protection.
Thank you so much, Kaya. And I wonder, Dora, you can cut me off, but I wonder if we want to just spend a couple of minutes talking about what data we're currently collecting and if we should be thinking differently about that type of data collection and what those strategies are, just so that folks can hear that from each other, right? Are there things that you are concerned about either collecting or publishing or reporting? And how should we be thinking about doing that differently?
Yeah,
I know we have an update section.
I think about, I know AOE does a lot of disaggregation and reporting and has student characteristics, race and student characteristics that are stored, and Power School had a massive breach, right? I don't know what was stored there, but I think that there are, it's like the information being stolen, right? And then information being subpoenaed. And I think that it really is important for us to know things like the differences in proficiency levels for third graders by different student characteristics, right? That tells us a lot of important information, and where's the vulnerability, and I think the math has changed in terms of what the risks are in storing some of that. So I don't know if Dave or Grant, you want to talk at all about that, or Emily or Terry from VDH.
I
Not sure I have it
Go ahead,
figured
Dave.
out. Go ahead. No, go ahead, please. I don't have anything to say that's useful.
I feel like there is a lot of thinking that needs to happen around this topic, and I think that the strategies will differ based on the program, the organization, the system level that we're looking at. Some programs need to collect certain demographic information to determine eligibility requirements. And so that makes it a little bit more difficult to maybe change protocols or requirements, because we do need to report on some of those things for families to get the services that they truly need to maintain their health and well-being. If we, are talking about programs that don't require those types of stringent eligibility um, data points, then I think that there are more human-centered approaches we can take to data collection, maybe um, verifying certain indicators verbally over the phone. These are things that take extra capacity and extra steps, but I think that we're in a space where we need to be nimble and creative in the way that we're collecting data and understanding the landscape, and maybe come up with, I wouldn't necessarily say like temporary or informal methods of tracking certain things, but that could certainly be an avenue that we go down in certain spaces. Um, I'm just spitballing in the group here, but these are some things that I think we should think about and maybe open those creative doors that might feel a little less rigorous or a little less stringent than we might be used to or be reaching for as a goal in terms of data quality and completeness. But that might be the trade-off that we're experiencing right now, and we have to buy into to ensure our families, our kids, and our folks are safe.
Thanks, Emily. Kaya, do you still have your hand up, or are you just hanging? Okay. I think that this conversation is going to evolve in the next couple of months around what is required, what we need to be thinking about, and depending on those needs, I'd love to bring the group back together if it would be helpful for folks to be strategizing around either data collection, data reporting, kind of how we as a state are coming together to think about responding to things that are happening at the federal level around data related to kids and families. I know our agencies are actively monitoring and doing that work, but I want to make sure that we're all on the same page in how we're trying to address it and making sure that we're hearing each other's questions and concerns across those areas. I want to take the last 10 minutes. Am I right on that, Dora? Yes, the last 10 minutes to do a round of updates to make sure that you all have a sense of what else is happening in the data realm. So Dora, if you want to facilitate that section, we can move.
Sure. Speed round. Reports, upcoming data collection, exciting things, opportunities for feedback. Emily.
I'm talking way too much during this meeting. I apologize.
it.
We are currently wrapping up analyses on our child care health and safety survey that we sent out in the fall of 2024. Terry did a wonderful job of doing some comprehensive analyses on that data set. So we're writing up our report right now, and we will be presenting that report hopefully within the next, probably around March timeframe. And then we will open it up for requests, analytic requests from partners. So if you're interested in looking at any of our data, any crosstabs or anything like that, we'll take those submissions and we'll work to facilitate that. Yeah. Any questions?
That's awesome. Can you get us just like some base, like that we can send out?
Yep.
Like what the topics are, how many people responded, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Super exciting. Others?
The Agency of Ed, we we got our fall data this year using EdFi. So that's the first major data collection that we've done that with that was real and live. So that's a big deal to us. There's all that's really not different data or anything like that. It's really just a tool that we were nervous about working, right? Uh, and then, of course, Grant is going to be publishing some pre-K reports, a legislative report on Act 166, and then I think later in the spring there should be a new Ready for Kindergarten data that Grant is wrapping up collection on.
Awesome. What did you say a timeline for the Act 166 report?
We just got back the comments from AHS CDD folks, so we're working through those, and I don't have a definitive timeline as long as it takes people to get everything in the right format for a legislative report, Dora.
Valid. I know about that. No, just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed something. No, super exciting. A lot of capacity added by Grant's position and Terry's position, really, and Stephen's position, and Anthony's position, PDG data analysts. So.
And they all met this week too to sort of get a better concept of how we're doing the pre-K or PKID assignment. It's kind of just a little tiny piece of all this, but it was still just really nice and exciting to see the two groups of people that they're on the same grant, they're in different agencies, and they're working together. So sounds simple, not always simple to do.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, huge, like many thanks. I am so appreciative of that. So the AOE and CDD teams came together to make sure that we were categorizing all UPK programs in exactly the same way. There was a mad scramble so that we could submit the State of Vermont's Children report on time to the legislature with accurate UPK data. But the level of collaboration to resolve data discrepancies required a lot of different people coming together, and just really excited to have that responsiveness and to have to be then developing a system to make sure that both data systems are receiving those updates as they come through. So huge win. Relatedly, we released the State of Vermont's Children, so our Keystone report, and had a briefing on January 13th. We'll send out the links for that. Huge thanks again to many of you for all of the providing data and the narrative and context that is so critical for our legislative partners and decision makers and partners across the system. We also just sent out, sort of publicized our needs assessment under the preschool development grant. We ended up doing a meta-analysis of 12 needs assessments that had been conducted over the last 5 years, and we will be doing an update of that on an annual basis. So we'll have a continual 5-year look back, and have a directory as well. So we'll send out those links. And then the last thing is I don't know that we have a date for it, but our next grand rounds is going to be a roundtable on Act 76 monitoring, and Act 76 generally, as well as, and we are planning out the next year of grand rounds. So if you have suggestions for topics, so far we've covered pre-K, preschool, equity and data collection. There might have been something else, Act 76. So if there are other topics that are coming to you, please let us know.
I was just looking up the last one. It was the family leadership panel.
Family leadership panel. I knew there was another one.
There's another one. All right. Any last final updates before we end today's meeting? It was really great to see all of you. I really appreciated Kendall and folks from UVM being here and all of our agencies and community partners. It's really helpful and valuable to have your perspectives in this space to be able to say, okay, here's what we all need to be thinking about and how we're going to be dealing with it. So thank you for being in the room. And if we need to have another meeting in the next month or so, we can absolutely pull folks together. Please reach out to us and let us know if you think that that would be helpful as well. Thanks all. Good to see you.